topic suggested to me by Dr. Vidya to speak on is women's life in Indian budgets. And I told him this topic is very close to my heart. And, yesterday in Facebook, Dr. Thomas Isaac has written that she's a macroeconomist with a gender lens. So there is a kind of a confusion whether I'm a feminist who can speak on this topic. So I will begin my lecture by clarifying the word feminism and why it is so important for us to embrace that word feminism. Feminism is about the human rights. It's about the capability deprivation that we are trying to address. And in the context of India, if you look into the education, health, workforce participation, or anything, if you take the indicators, you can understand that there is a fundamental asymmetry in achievements between men and women. And this is about the capability deprivation, which Amartya Sen also talked about. So to me, feminism is about human rights and capability deprivation. And that bad connotation about this word feminism must have come from that freedom or a kind of a mindless freedom which women seek. These are the confusions we have in the mind about feminism. I'm not sure. But I have my colleagues and my peer economists who proudly say they are men and women who proudly say that they are feminist. And my previous boss, Ratin Roy, who was the member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, he used to say, Lekha, you can tell boldly that your boss is a feminist economist. So this is the way I worked with feminist men and women, and it's precious for me to look into the issues concerning the women's life. Now, the methodology in which we have to speak, because as an economist, people always look for rigor in my works, not stories. So that was the biggest challenge when I started working on this issue. On one side, there is a methodology in which you speak about women's issues, those compelling stories you hear from women. And that story is worth running millions of regressions or models, or you arrive at a policy solution. And I am aware of that. But as an economist, when we started articulating the women's life in Indian budgets, the Ministry of Finance was trying to look for the quantification through numbers, what you speak about. So it's a kind of a silent revolution that gender, it's not a micro subject. It has to be talked by the macro policy makers to reach to the next level. We need to integrate a gender lens in the macro policy making. So challenges were many. So I myself was getting confused because, Thomas Isaac sir has written yesterday about this lecture, and he mentioned that I worked with him on a topic related to macroeconomic impacts of deficit. And my colleagues were working on, that masculine topics like deficits, interest rate, inflation. So in that corridors of Ministry of Finance and a Public Finance Institute, I was asked to talk about gender lens, how you can incorporate into the macro policy framework. So that was a challenge. And now it may look so normal, but that revolution happened. It's a beautiful revolution that has happened in the public policy in the sense we have taken the agenda of economics beyond GDP. When we talk about, growth, usually we stop at the level of GDP. And the aspiration of any country is to reach from one level of growth to next level of growth. In UN forums, when we sat in the meetings, their graduation dream or an aspiration is to reach to the next level of growth in terms of GDP. But now, UN Secretary General recently has spoken that we need to take it beyond growth. So this gender budgeting or integrating gender lens, it comes as a part of beyond GDP agenda. So how we can push the dreams or the aspirations of a country beyond GDP. So that's the starting point. Now, another beautiful point is about how Scandinavian countries have approached this problem. In Scandinavian countries, if you look at the gender development, if you look at the human development, Scandinavian countries top the scale in terms of Human Development Index or Gender Development Index. In Scandinavian countries, there was a kind of revolution that has happened in the Northern Europe. You can take a look into a movie, a documentary, Swedish Love. It talks about the fundamental independence between each other. So in a society, when there is fundamental independence between each other, that's the beginning of real love and appreciation between human beings. So you're not dependent on each other. That space you create in the society. And we think that it is a kind of an intra-household issue. It has to happen within the household. But in Northern Europe, they have taken it as a public policy revolution where men and women or the children, they can be fundamentally independent of each other. And what could be that role of the state in providing that support? So that's the way, that beautiful revolution that has happened in Northern Europe in integrating women's life in the public policy. But in our country, we have not reached to that extent of public policy revolution, but we have started talking about integrating gender lens into the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. Can you imagine a central bank governor speaking about the topics related to women's life in his appearance before media or before public? So far, that revolution has not happened. This was the case 20, 25 years back when we started articulating the gender, which is to be integrated into the Ministry of Finance. That time, nobody could connect to it. They asked for numbers. And when we looked at the numbers, one of the indicators which stood, very, very significant was the sex ratio, the juvenile or the child sex ratio. Why that is happening? On one hand, given equal care and nutrition, women tend to live more than men. It's a biological advantage. But this biological advantage is getting neutralized by some sort of gender discrimination. And that gender discrimination starts even before birth. So, is this an intra-household issue that the men and women within the household decides that, or the role of the state that has got a role to play? So this was the question which was asked. And the unit of analysis of integrating gender into the policy framework is intra-household. Because in many cases we think that the household we can take as a unit of analysis and the government can function. No. If you look at the state or the role of the state as a welfare model, then we need to articulate what's happening within the household. And there's a beautiful work by Kaushik Basu. Kaushik Basu has written a paper on gender and say, S-A-Y, say, within the household. So what are the decisions we make within the household in which women can have a say? And what are the decisions which men dominate in the decision making? And if the state machinery handhold women, can that lead to less incidences of violence in the society, in the societal violence and the intra-household violence? Or the state does not have any role to play. So these were the questions asked by the scholars, the right questions asked by the scholars prior to me, so that the path was easy for us to follow that. And when you ask about the questions related to the violence against women, of course, now a lot of violence that's happening, but there is a silence. We are not seeing the kind of reaction from the public, the way we reacted in December 2010 or 2011, when a girl was brutally murdered in the public space, in the public transport in New Delhi. Boys, men and women, they came out. It was a revolution. But why there is a silence in the society these days? When we talk about the issues related to the women, we need to do an introspection and why it's not happening. In 2010 or 2011, when that happened, nobody told that it's because the girl, she went out. She was a medical student. She went out with her boyfriend to see the movie Life of Pi after sunset. She thought that now my vacation, my study leave will begin, my exams will come. Before that, I'll go for a movie after sunset. But she was brutally murdered in a public space. And within 30 days, the government was pressurized to perform. within 30 days, a document was put forward, that is Justice Verma Committee recommendations. And that is a beautiful report. Amartya Sen's capability deprivation framework was there in that report. Within 30 days, that report was written, and the report begins with the acceptance that this incidents, that violence against the women, that brutal murder happened to that lady is because of the public policy failure. That was the acceptance. Nobody asked why she was there after sunset. And this acceptance that it's a public policy failure is a starting point of integrating the gender into the macro, or the gender into the economic policy making. And there's a beautiful Bill of Rights in that Verma Committee recommendation report. And that Bill of Rights talks about the integrity of women, that we need to look into the different aspects of level, and how to translate that Bill of Rights into the policy commitments and into the budgetary commitments. We need to take a look into that Bill of Rights. And after all these days, that Bill of Rights is waiting for a champion to open up and to see how we can map this Bill of Rights, that integrity. It's not really about the bodily integrity. It talks about the capability deprivation and how it can be mapped to the policy commitments. And I heard that, within 30 days, when that incident happened, the conscience could not take it, that what has happened to that girl. And I heard that the scholars from Oxford and Cambridge, they sat with Justice Verma Committee, and they were working day and night. They were aware of, the frameworks related to gender, and they produced that report. So it's not talked about the, lessening the age of the juvenile. No, it talks about all the different aspects of how it is to be integrated into the public policy. So that's about the Verma Committee. But when I compare, now we are not responding enough to, what's happening around related to the women's issues or the women's life. Now, the origins of the gender budgeting. 2004, what has happened is that we started thinking of producing a statement in the budget documents articulating to the world how much India is spending for women. So that was the methodology which we began with. And in that, there are many programs that are articulated for the safety and security of the women, and also looking into the capability deprivation and violence against women. And over the years, the call budget circular, that's the way it is mandated. Over the years, subnational governments, the state governments also have started looking into these issues, how to integrate. Now, why it is stagnant at 5% or 3%? Why there is no life for this magical tool called gender budgeting? So this re-articulation or rebooting that happened, and the discussions are now, began in terms of why this is stagnant. To understand that, we need to look into the overall fiscal framework of the country. Fiscal means the policies which government formulate is fiscal. So I was asked to talk about the public policy, and I need to tell you we have two public policy tools. One is the central bank's monetary policy tool, and the other is the fiscal policy tool. So over the years, why this has not happened is because we have a tight fiscal rule to be followed, in the sense, and we are from Kerala, so we know that what are the debates that's happening related to the public debt. So now, on one side, economists are very worried that Kerala will follow Sri Lanka model. What's going to happen? The debt is mounting. So this is a way, on one side, it is articulated. On other side, it is articulated that deficit and debt is good if you can relate it to, protecting the human capital formation you have attained in Kerala, or it is related to, the growth outcomes, if you can reduce the output gaps in your country. So I belong to the school of thought where a timely deficit is good. But why the gender budgeting and the policies related to the human development is very stagnating in nature? Just because we have to see the overall fiscal policy framework. And this fiscal policy framework now, there's a debate that we have lot of, tax that came up in the recent budget, because we have a problem of fiscal space. So when your fiscal consolidation happens, when the fiscal deficit is tight at 3%, and on one side your taxes are not buoyant and you're not collecting taxes properly, then the only way in which you can keep that deficit at 3% is expenditure compression. You need to reduce your spending, and in this expenditure compression, the expenditure related to the human development will be curtailed very fast. So this is a challenge. So if you ask me why gender budgeting is stagnant, one, we need to look into the macro policy framework itself, whether there is a tightness in the macroeconomic policy of our country. Now, let me take a minute to take you beyond the GDP and to this macro policy, why I'm saying it is rigid. Over the years, there was a transition from the discretionary, elements by the policymaker towards a rule-based macro policy making in our country. Rules in the sense, now, you have a fiscal rule. It's very tight. You cannot spend beyond 3%. On other side, you have a monetary policy rule that the RBI will look into only the inflation elements. So human development is not integrated into that rule. It looks only into the inflation. So when you have tightness in the public policy frameworks, then the opening you get to integrate the human development concerns is limited. Of course, we have now the human development paradigm in terms of SDGs, Sustainable Development Human Framework, but it's not enough for us to start these debates locally to integrate these issues. Now comes a question, how do you measure the contribution of our mothers, sisters? We work a lot. If you just look into 8 hours work, what you go out and work, that is only getting captured into the GDP. But if you ask me what is the contribution of men and women in the society, it's not just this 8 hours, which you call as work and that gets integrated into GDP. 24 hours minus 8, what's happening? We need to look into those aspects, because in this 24 minus 8, that for the easy for to make it easy, if I say that we call as a unpaid care economy, then we need to look into this, what is happening in the care economy, to understand the overall economic well-being of a nation. Because the economy can be divided into what is in the market economy, that's happening 8 hours, and this 24 minus 8, of course, you remove your personal care or sleeping, everything, but you are doing some economic activity in terms of, the ILO definition, work is work. It's happening within the household. So how do you measure that? Unless you look into these aspects, the resource allocation and efficiency of what is happening into the unpaid care economy sector, you are just talking about just 8 hours and that's getting into GDP, then the overall well-being of a country, that's not the perfect way to look into. But if you incorporate the public policies into the care and the market economy, then your overall economic well-being will be much more. But how to get into this? I mentioned about the Scandinavian revolution that the public policy needs to be looked into. Otherwise, if you think that equal opportunity provides a beautiful paradigm, things have not happened, because we got independence in 1947, and if equal opportunity works, if that paradigm, if that worked, things would have been different by this time. Equal opportunity in the sense, the government provides you schools, colleges, everything. Public service, utility you can do. And government doesn't discriminate. Budget doesn't discriminate. You come and access. But the moment economists look into the access statistics, the public service provisioning were accessed differently. So when a country progress, if a group of people, they are kept vulnerable, they are not able to come and access the schools and colleges, don't you think that the public policy has a role to play over there to break these entry barriers so that everybody can come and participate into the economic activity equally? So if you say that equal opportunity works everything, then why a group of people, they are not able to access it. So the role of public policy is to break that logical entry barriers. So that public policy revolution incorporates gender budgeting and integrating this a gentle lens into the public policy making. So, what could be those policies? And if you look into the care economy policies, of course, in Scandinavian countries, you have a lot of good policies. And in Canada, one thing I need to mention, that is compassionate care benefits. So, if our close relative, if we have a close ailing relative, if you're working, we need to come and take care of him or her, and we will be always on toes because our boss will be calling. Is there any dignified way in which you can be away? In Canada, they have compassionate care benefits up to 6 months in discrete or in continuous. You can be away from your work and you have benefits for that. But if you look at the comprehensive care economy package in India, all we have is the policies related to the child care. And the center government gives to 2 years, discrete or continuous, because there are moments in which women who are performing passionately think twice that whether I can continue work or do I need to support. So there is a stress. It's not patriarchal, because men and women are equally helpless in such decision making moments. And it's quickly one person taking a decision, okay, I quit. Okay, those passions, everything I forget, now I quit to support my family. But if there is a policy by government, can this stress be released? So what could be that role of state to support men and women so that this can be released? So this all are closely related to a comprehensive care economy package. And in India, we cannot talk about any comprehensive care economy package unless we talk about informal sector, because only 8% of us work in India in the formal sector. And if such a huge informal sector is there in Indian economy, we need to look into the aspects related to informal sector. And after demonetization, we wanted to see what has happened to the informal sector. And, to study the informal sector, to study the issues, we need to have good data. Data fundamentalism is one thing, lack of data is yet another. So gender disaggregated data, that's a crucial thing. We look forward to study these issues, and the lacuna of the disaggregated data itself hinder the studies, that empirical evidence we require to back these studies. So the data is a huge problem. Now, I remember the Geeta Gopinath and the RBI, these studies, they look into the intensity of night lights to capture the growth in the informal sector. So those satellite data, so I don't understand what do you infer from that night lights related to the growth process or the employment process in the informal sector. So data is a huge concern. Now, regarding this comprehensive care economic package, the first question asked to us is, how do you measure this women and men's work in the informal sector? Do you have a number just like GDP? So we have worked with several methodologies to come with a number. This same question is asked about the climate, the green accounting as well, because now, as public financial management tools, on one side the climate is getting attention, on the other side the human development issues related to integrating the gender lens. Now, will it be a watertight compartment, like gender on one side, climate on the other side? That's unfortunate to happen, but that's the way things are moving ahead. But this climate and women's issue are closely correlated when it comes to the measurement issues. I take a minute to integrate this climate concerns, because I traveled from the airport yesterday, and I was, I got scared seeing what is happening in that Shankamugam beach, because we have put the new infrastructure, but we are not sure what is going to happen next. Now the country is articulating on the national adaptation communication for the first time against that COP27 in Egypt. So in that, when they come up with the national adaptation communication, a gender lens is incorporated into that, because there is a case of livelihood crisis over there in addition to the infrastructure concerns. So these are uncorrelated. And one more point about this climate change, just like the way it has happened in early 2000s related to gender, now who will address this climate concerns is a big tug of war in Delhi and in Mint Road. RBI, of course, they came up with a note that we have tools to address this climate change concerns, but it has to be particularly the cup of tea of the policymakers in the North Bloc or in the ministry. Why they are talking like this? Because adaptation and mitigation can go little political. there's a political economy to it, because we cannot talk about any issues, gender, climate, or anything without the elements of political economy. So the reputation risk will be there. So don't talk about climate change. So this was the advice given to the central bank governors. And of course, in ECB, Christine Lagarde is very vocal about this issue. Why I'm connecting this? Because years back, when we started talking about gender into the macroeconomy, the same concerns were addressed, that there is a political economy to it, and it can lead to reputation risk of North Block or the ministry. You cannot talk about the gender. It has to be a cup of tea at the micro sectoral level. So this is the way things were denied. That opening was very tough. Now coming to the point, who are the stakeholders when we speak about it? Is it the academicians alone? No, the civil society organizations, parliamentarians, he was here, the parliamentarians, everyone, needs to be the stakeholders to move the things to the next level. Parliamentarians, I take a minute to make you, understand how we can have an entry point in the parliamentary process. In the parliament debates, it's very tough to get a new issues discussed, because there is time on task. So, the time is divided, like a party will get a time. With a party, they will decide what are the topics to be highlighted into the debate. So, what is that, starting point to talk about the new issues like gender or climate change among the parliamentarians? So, then the entry point was that in the budgetary process, before the budget happened in early February, there could be a group of discussions by the pressure groups. It's not vested interest. People from various forums, they come and talk to the minister. So there the gender or the climate related issues can be integrated. Now, after the budget, the parliament goes to recess. Then the parliament come back after the recess, then they start this vote on account, debates related to that. So is there any space to talk about gender issues or climate issues when they go on recess? What could be that demystification of budget through a gender lens can happen immediately after the budget, and then before the parliament comes back for the vote on. So there you have many standing committees. So these were the tough entry points in which this research agenda was moved forward. It was very tough. This research agenda was moved forward through these entry points. And otherwise, a new topic within a strict framework, it's very difficult to get a leeway. And how many of you will come forward to talk about this? That's another issue. And I went to this American Economic Association conference in 2019 in Atlanta. I met Janet Ellen there. In one panel, Janet Ellen mentioned, and her colleagues, various scholars mentioned the toughness of talking about gender in your early career. Like the way I mentioned, in a public finance institute, when I was asked to do a work on gender, many scholars may not come forward. You know that women's life needs to be integrated into the gender budgets, into the budget. That masculine framework needs to be broken. But how many of you will take that lead to come and work on the issues related to gender? And many confessed. And Janet Ellen, you can hear that conversation between Janet Ellen, the Treasury Secretary, and Kristalina, IMF Managing Director. That conversation is there in the IMF website. You listen to that conversation, the toughness in which these issues get acceptance in the macro policy making, because scholars, they accepted the fact that we didn't take up this issue because we fear we get sidelined. Our contributions are enough or not. We are not sure. So they hesitated to work on these issues related to gender. So these are the ways in which there are toughness in the system, toughness in the topics selected by the researchers. So despite of all these things, if research have moved forward, means something that delta X we say, means the rate of change, that's there. It's not stagnant. There is a delta X. There is a rate of change related to these topics. And I hope that the same kind of revolution can happen on the side of RBI. These are the issues. So I talked about the strictness or the rigidness in the macroeconomic policy framework. I talked about the measurement issues. I talked about the difficulties faced within the institutions to take it ahead. So there are many challenges. But despite all these things, over the years, gender budgeting became a fiscal innovation. So when you talk about an innovation, it has to pass through several stages. The first stage is, of course, the knowledge building. The equal-minded people, they come and brainstorm about your new idea. So that knowledge building will happen. What is the model specific to your country you identify? That's the first phase of an innovation. Second phase is institutional framework. Okay, good brains, they are doing some wonderful things, but that's there on the paper as research. How you can translate this into a public policy? So that public policy research is different from academic research. So to translate this research into policy making, you need good institutions, because if institutions fail, you cannot take a research ahead. So that was the second phase. The third phase was capability. So the state capacity or the capability framework. And the fourth one is the accountability mechanisms. Because gender budgeting was floated as a tool of accountability. So if it is a tool of accountability, you need to build in, those kind of accountability mechanisms. And if you ask me, in Asia Pacific, this experiment has gone through all these four stages in many countries. Now the challenge is you need to do a do it legally mandated, because in India this gender budgeting or integrating the gender into a policy framework is not a legally mandated process. In the sense, in one way you can say that of course it is mandated through the budget call circular, it's little legal, but otherwise look at job guarantee schemes. Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It's like a labor rights scheme. You ensure a certain days of employment to people. Is it legally mandated? In a way, if you don't guarantee that specified number of days, then it can be public interest litigation. So, do you want to take that route to make, gender budgeting? If such a good tool is there in your state or there in your country, if you are not providing enough, good things to the women, can it be taken as a public interest litigation? So this was discussed, and I know that in Niti Aayog now they are talking about Gender Budgeting Act. So I don't think that the public interest litigation may be a good way to articulate the legally mandated thing for gender budgeting. We can look into a few cross-country experiments, how this is done in other countries. In Philippines, the gender budgeting was mandated as earmarking. Like you specify a particular budget earmarked for the gender development. So that's the way it has happened. But that is not translated into good results, because you need to support the resources with the results. So there should be a link. Now, what happened to Korea? In Korea, we have this FRBM, fiscal rules in our country. In Korea, there's national finance law. And if you look at the national finance law, that talks about only the finance things. But the gender budgeting, the clauses and the elements related to the gender budgeting were incorporated in the national finance law in Korea. So can we take that route to integrate gender budgeting legally in the context of India? So these are the upcoming debates that, because when you talk about the women's issue, of course on one side legal fiat needs to be strong. People need to be punished. Law and order needs to be strong. On one side is fiscal fiat, and we need to work together, because the fiscal fiat, the people who work with the budgets and work with the public policy cannot say that it's a cup of tea of the legal mandate. You go with good legislations and ensure things happen on that side, but not budget. Of course, this picture is a broad picture that when we talk about the women's development, but we need to look into all the tools. Though the brush is small, it's okay, but you have a tool to play with. Now comes a controversial issue about the finance commissions. 16th Finance Commission will be there in November. And I don't know whether there will be female members or it will be only male members. There will not be any South Indians. So all those compositions that career theory students work into, the composition of the institution matter. That also, it's not only economic variables, but who works, those things also matter. Those career theories, economists and people work on that, because, there is a say that central bank governors' personal traits that affects the interest rate movements, or finance minister's personal traits that affects the quality of deficit. Like the way Isaac decide on deficit will be different from how Balagopal decides on the deficit. So there are differences based on your personal traits. Now, if you superimpose that question, then Prime Minister's economic characteristics can affect the economic growth for your country. A silent Prime Minister or an educated leader. So students started looking into these career theories. So why the composition of 16th Finance Commission is important? Because we need to understand the kind of decisions to be made by the members and the chairman. Suppose a moment we dream that 16th Finance Commission is coming up with the decision that they are going to integrate a gentle lens in the Finance Commission. That's going to be a revolutionary step. And economists are divided because on one side people say, look, this is not about the economic inequalities or the gender inequalities. This commission, as an institution, talks about the fiscal disabilities between the states, and we need to transfer funds from center to state to, for that economic convergence, so that the poor states will catch up with the rich states. So it's all about economic convergence. But wait, over the years we have seen a revolution. Climate change, as a part of the Finance Commission, was integrated as a terms of reference. If climate change can be the part of the terms of reference of Finance Commission, why can't you talk about the human development related, gender related concerns? Because this is also about the cost disabilities. Now, we remember the debates related to the population. To put the things in perspective, I will mention, how this transfer of funds is done. It's based on a formula, a simple formula. It's based on the population of the state area, then tax effort, climate change as per the forest area. So you have many variables, many indicators. So based on that, you give certain weightage, and then the funds is transferred. So it looks so scientific. There is no discretion of a policy making authority in that formula. It's a scientific formula and you devolve funds. But discretion happens in the manner in which you apply weights and you select variables. So there was a concern when we started using population of the recent years, because all the Finance Commission used long term, earlier population figures. Then recently, when they started move to the population of the 2011 census, then there was a concern. And you remember those debates, like Kerala is not getting good devolution because we controlled our population, send girls to the school. So are we getting punished for the good things we have done? Then we asked for a compensation. A compensation in the sense, what in the formula to be added to make it a corrective mechanism. Then TFR, total fertility ratio, was added to it. But is it gender? In a way, it's gender, but it was added into the population, and TFR cannot be that strict gender variable because it was added for the demographic transition concept. But a pure gender, can it be integrated into the intergovernmental fiscal transfers? It is political. Can it be done? In the 16th Finance Commission, we need to see whether there will be a female member, whether they will integrate a formula related to the gender lens. Will that be on the TOR? Because Nari Shakti is talked about a lot by the cabinet. So what could be that in the Finance Commission? We need to wait and see how they are going to articulate, or will there be too much emphasis on how to tackle the freebies? Again, gender budgeting is not a freebie. How do you articulate gender budgeting as a freebie? Giving cycles to the girls or supporting women by providing energy infrastructure so that she and her child within a poorly ventilated home, they will not have less life expectancy because she's cooking food for her baby, and their life expectancy is coming down because they are using inferior quality of fuel. So the government has acted like giving good clean fuel to the women, and these things we cannot call as a freebie. So there should be a very good clarity related to what exactly is freebie before we start articulating on, or the debate like states have a lot of freebies. Giving laptop to the children, is it a freebie? Giving grinders to women, is it a freebie? So these kind of questions needs to be thought out. And on one side, participation income is given importance. On other side, it's not freebies but cash transfers into the hands of women is getting emphasis. So as policymakers and as citizens, we should have a clarity in what kind of policies do we require to support the human development in our country. Participation income, in the sense you provide equal opportunity in employment and guarantee as a participation income. You remove the logical entry barriers so that leave nobody behind. That LNOB is a major framework and everybody can participate in the economy and earn an income, that is participation income. On the other side, Arvind Subramaniam, when he was chief economic advisor, he floated an idea of universal basic income by providing helicopter money, money into the hands of people, money into the hands of women. So we need to have a clear sense that what exactly we talk about when we need to articulate between participation income and basic income, because participation income is long term, basic income can be short term. When an economy passed through the crisis, then we need to support with cash transfers when the jobs dry up. And in the post pandemic fiscal strategy, these were incorporated, but now the normalization procedure has started. Most of the things were rolled back. Then these contexts, gender budgeting will clearly be articulated as a long-term public financial management tool. That's why this is not getting disturbed by the articulation related to freebies, because it is looked into as a long-term public financial management tool. And that's very relevant. So over the years, if you ask me whether there is a delta change or good things have happened, good things have happened. Now let me share with you, I don't have any hesitation to share with you what has not worked. What has not worked is related to the marksmanship. What is your marksmanship? What you aspire for and you attain that. If there is no gap, your marksmanship is good. Like that, Ministry of Finance or any public policy institutes, if you take, there's a marksmanship. What you promise to the people and what you give. So in this marksmanship analysis, the promises given by the minister, they were not backed up by allocations. And if you look through the numbers in that journey, what is promised and what is delivered is a huge gap. If the marksmanship is not perfect, what exactly are you talking about? This is not happening related to the gender budgeting, but related to many aspects with the government. And if what is budgeted itself is not translating into actual spending, then what are the outcomes you're talking about? Because we have outcome budgets as well. So these are the important things you need to look into, because these are not working. So marksmanship is a bad news for you, because gender budgeting, that's a very promising framework. What we need to articulate is related to the marksmanship. Now, do we have fiscal councils in our country? No. Fiscal council is a kind of a watchdog. And Isaac sir doesn't like fiscal council because the fiscal rules that type 3% itself is a huge tightness related to the fiscal space. You need to be very careful about your fiscal consolidation, because if the revenues are uncertain, then you cannot have your expenditure, because revenue stability is the basis of expenditure commitments. So if your revenues are not stable, then otherwise you have to go through the debt path. And the debt path is again a huge issue, because the articulation is that it is going to create intergenerational inequality, that we are creating a lot of debt to the future generations. So there, my question towards you, because as a state, we are debating on the public debt now. We will not follow the Sri Lankan case because we don't have any external debt. So we will not go that way. And if you look at the numbers are under control. It's not like we have huge debt and it's the public debt sustainability is in crisis or anything. No. But the question that you are putting the future generations in debt, that needs a rethinking. If you're doing a good infrastructure with the present debt, if you're sustaining the human development capital formation in the state, then that is intergenerational fairness or equity rather than iniquity. But if you think that that's creating intergenerational inequities and you need to keep the deficit at 3%, then you go for that expenditure cut, public expenditure cut, and that mindless expenditure cut can affect human development capital formation. Now, let me stop here and open the floor. I need to hear your voices and concerns so that I can fine tune my thought process to your requirements. So I invite questions from you. I'll note down the questions, or maybe 5 or 6 questions, then I can come back and address those questions together, because I can see young scholars here. I can, so the floor is, yeah, hi. The floor is open, and it's a learning process. It can be interactive, and I think that's very important to do before we leave the forum. It's over to you.